Hello, and welcome to Omega Studio School of Applied Recording Arts and Sciences Financial Aid webinar. My name is Denise, and I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Omega. And quite frankly, my job is to make sure that I can find the most money possible for our students and our families. Now, unfortunately, financial aid is not going to pay for everything. We don't have very high loan limits as an undergraduate student, but here at Omega, we also are participate in the in the VA programs, and we offer payment plans. So my second hat is to try to make sure that we can find an affordable means for you and your family to afford going to school here at Omega. So, with this being an abbreviated workshop on financial aid, I thought maybe what we do is look at that proverbial 30-foot or 30,000-foot view of our financial aid process, how you can submit your application, what's involved, what happens afterwards, and how is it that your financial aid officer can come up with how much money you're going to receive. So, if we get started, what I'd like to do is bring a form up here for you to take a look at as I talk. And what this is it is a form that I can send out to everybody. So if you would like, you can email me at financialaid@omegastudios.com and I will be happy to send this to you. But if we look at the first section here on the form, it talks about how um, you can be eligible for financial aid. The first thing we want to look to is the fact that you have to be enrolled in a qualified program. Now, Omega has three. Their programs that qualify for financial aid are going to be the comprehensive program, which is 900 hours, the audio engineering for the music industry, and also for the film and television programs. Our other component programs are too short and they are not eligible for financial aid. As far as the eligibility criteria goes, we're looking here, and this essentially is the mainstay of what we need to do to be primarily or at least initially eligible for financial aid. I want to bring your attention here to the one that talks about males in selective service. If you are between the ages of 18 and 25, you were born male, you are required by federal law to register with selective service. If you have not registered, you are not eligible for financial aid until you do. If you are beyond the age of 26 and you have not registered with Selective Service, now you have some extra steps you need to follow. Before you can be deemed eligible for financial aid, you'll need to provide documentation from Selective Service that you were waived, or they will send a letter saying that that choice or decision to put you into financial aid goes back to the financial aid officer. Very possible, reasonable to do, but some extra hoops that we have to jump through. So, what I'd like to talk to you about now, if I may, is the actual processing for financial aid. Now, financial aid is accessed through the federal government's application called a FAFSA. It's an acronym we use because the name is too long and I'd always get it screwed up. So, the FAFSA is located online, and the website that you'll want to use is studentaid.gov. Now, that has become the Fed's one stop shop for everything you need to know about financial aid. So, whether you are trying to access it to complete your FAFSA, or you have questions about the various loans, you're interested in the different payment plans, that website is the one that you want to go to. Again, that's studentaid.gov. So, the FAFSA is an electronic process. In order to submit your FAFSA, to actually create it and then to submit it, you have to have an FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. Now, that is done on, guess where? Studentaid.gov. It takes about 24 hours for the FAFSA ID or the FSA ID to process through the various databases. Once that's done, then the student can use that ID to open up the FAFSA and to begin submitting or answering the questions. Now, there's also a situation in which the parent has to have an FSA ID. Later on, we're going to talk about what makes a difference between a dependent student and an independent student. But basically, if you are a dependent student, in order for you to submit your FAFSA, your parent must use their FSA ID to sign the document, and then it can be processed. Parents, word of advice: if you're going to assist your child in filling out the FAFSA, you never, ever, ever access the student's FAFSA with your FSA ID. You always log in under the student information, not yours. Okie dokie. So the FAFSA is there. It's on studentloans.gov. You've created your FSA ID in advance. So now you're going to go in and you're going to start answering the questions. Now, if you have not done the FAFSA before, I can offer for you that it looks to be terribly intimidating. So I make myself available to anyone who wants to do the FAFSA with me in my office or over our New Road platform, such as we're doing now, or over the phone. Makes it faster, easier, less likely to make mistakes, far less painful. And the important thing, the big advantage to that is that we'll know right then and there how much financial aid you'll be able to access based on the program that you're enrolling with here at Omega. Most cases, when you submit your FAFSA, it's going to take 3 to 5 business days for that information to come into my federal mailbox, and then I will have access and I can give you those very same answers. In order for your FAFSA to come into my mailbox, you'll be asked during the application as to what school codes you want the information sent to. A mega school code, and I'll give that to you now, is 041416. It's also on that Affording Your Education form that I put up on the screen a little while earlier. So again, 041416 will get your application into my mailbox. Now, once that arrives, what I do is I look to see if we have any conflicting information on the FAFSA. Another thing that I'm looking for is whether or not the file has been selected for verification or if there may be what we call a C code. Any one of those three items on a FAFSA will make it ineligible for financial aid until you and your financial aid officer resolve those codes. Verification is a random process. That means essentially that there are some items that Congress has declared necessary for the financial aid officer to confirm as accurate in order for the student to be eligible for financial aid. And C codes will oftentimes correspond to citizenship status or names and social securities not matching up, possibly even selective service. Again, these typically can all be resolved, but the important thing to understand is if you are notified that you have a C code verification or conflicting information, you have to work with your financial aid officer and get that resolved. Okay, then, if don't mind me looking at my notes. Once I take a look at that financial aid application, I'll be able to determine how much financial aid you can receive. Now, there are different sources of funds that we use here at Omega. And what I'll do is I'll generate a financial plan. That's going to outline the cost of your program and how much financial aid you're going to receive from what source and how much. And very importantly, it's going to let us know how much is not covered under financial aid. And I wish I could tell you that we're going to get lots of money from the feds. And the answer simply is we're not going to. Believe it or not, you can have a bachelor's, you can have a master's, you can even have a PhD. And when you go to a new school for the very first time, you are a first year undergraduate only eligible for the minimum amount of aid that the feds offer, and that is as an undergraduate first year. So we will always have a balance that we have to figure out, and that's why I'm here. All right. Now, one other string that's attached to receiving financial aid is that the student has to complete what is called entrance counseling. Entrance counseling is very boring, takes you about 30 minutes, And it basically is all the information that Congress wants you to know about the federal loan programs. You have to work your way through it. You got to get it done because without it, I cannot originate your loan. The other thing that you have to do is you have to promise to pay the money back. That is done through a master promissory note. And guess what website all of that's located at? You got it, studentaid.gov. All right. Well, what I think we'll do now, if you don't mind, is I'm going to open this back up again. And I want to talk a little bit about the types of financial aid that you can receive here at Omega. Now, one thing that you'll need to understand, your FAFSA is an application to everything that the federal government offers in the Department of Ed. But the funds that you can access are completely dependent upon which programs the school wants to play with. So, here in this section, if I may show you, are the programs in which we participate. The first one here is the Pell Grants. Those are the good guys. These are monies that we do not have to pay back. They are grant monies, they are gift monies. Now, the amount of financial aid or amount of grant money that a student can receive is dependent upon a couple things. While you're filling out the FAFSA, in the background, they're running a formula. When you hit the submit button, it creates an EFC, expected family contribution. Now, your financial aid officer is going to take that EFC, going to marry it up to the Pell Grant charts, and that's going to help them understand just how much of the free money the student can receive. So, again, the length of the program as well as the EFC has a major determination in exactly how much you can, how many funds you can be awarded. When we look at the Stafford loans, which is the next thing on our list, these are strictly for students only, and they are loans, so you must pay them back. Now, the student loans come in two flavors. The Stafford loans are a subsidized and an unsubsidized version. They are identical with one difference. The subsidized loan and the unsub will accrue interest from the first disbursement. But in the case of the subsidized loan, the federal government is going to pay the interest for you while you're in school and continue for what we call the grace period. The grace period is 6 months from the time that you last attend school, whether you drop or graduate, before you absolutely have to begin repayment 6 months later. So you have a 6 month grace period. In the subsidized loan, the feds will pay the interest during that grace period. The unsubsidized loan, no such luck. Shy of dying, you are going to have to pay the interest on your own, and it will begin to accrue with its first disbursement. When does that first disbursement take place? Usually within the first couple of months, or couple of weeks, I should say, of your start. Now, the feds will never send you the entire amount of money up front. In fact, they don't send it to you, period. They send it to the school. So this means then that whatever aid you're entitled to receive, 50% of that will come in the beginning and 50% will come at midpoint. We are a clock hour school. That's very different from a traditional credit hour school. In a traditional institution, you don't normally worry about attendance. You just have to make sure that you pass all of the coursework. But in a clock hour program such as ours, you not only have to pass all the coursework, but you also have to physically sit in the chair. And if you do not sit in the chair for enough hours and you do not pass that coursework, you are not eligible for your second disbursement. So, in a clock hour environment, you attending is absolutely critical. The Stafford loan, as you'll see down here when you get a chance to look at it, your interest rate is very reasonable at 2.75%. The feds do charge a loan fee or an origination fee. So you may borrow $5,000. You're going to pay back $5,000, but the feds are not going to send the school $5,000. So when you look at the financial plan that I create for you and you start adding everything up, you're never going to come to the dollar amount that you're planning to borrow because the difference is the origination fees. There's a 10-year term on the Stafford loans. You take 10 years to pay off your Stafford loan, I'm going to hunt you down. There's no other way for me to say it. The loan's a very reasonable expense. You've got 10 years if you need it, but that's 10 years of interest that you really don't need to pay. So maybe in the very beginning, you use your standard payment plans just until you get money squared away. Remember, you're not required to begin repayment until the end of that 6-month grace period. So you've got 6 months to get your career established and to start those funds coming in. Um, and if you wish, use the standard plan, the minimum monthly payments. But as soon as you can, I urge you to make additional payments, pay them off early. There's no penalty, and save yourself interest costs. Let's talk a little briefly about the unsubsidized loan. The unsubsidized loan has interest in which the feds are not going to pay for you. So, with that first half of your loan dispersed shortly after you start school, the interest rate is going to begin to accrue. You do not have to make a payment of any kind to your student loans until you reach or approach the end of your grace period. But what happens to that interest? Well, from the time of the first disbursement until you begin your repayment, any interest that has not been paid is going to be added to the original loan amount, cause a greater loan dollar, and now the interest is going to be paid on top of that new higher loan. So effectively, your interest is going to accrue interest. How can that be reduced? Easily make an interest only payment on your loan. With your interest rate as low as it is, you're not looking at a lot of money. Now, it's not required by any means, but if you have the means, I recommend that you do it because overall it's going to save you money on that loan. The next thing we want to talk about is the parent loan. Now, usually when I start talking about parent loans, their eyes roll to the back of their head and they begin to feel very lightheaded. Hang in there. It's not as bad as you might think. Parent Plus loans are designed for students who we consider to be dependent. And you'll see down here in this section that a dependent student is usually somebody who's less than 23 years of age and has essentially answered no to about 13 questions on the FAFSA, designed specifically to identify whether or not they're dependent. So, being married, providing more than 50% support out of your own money for your own child or somebody else, being in the military, homeless, ward of the court, things along that nature would make you independent regardless of your age. But if you are dependent, then your parent information has to be included on the FAFSA, and your parent can access this parent federal loan to help pay for the difference between the cost of the program and what your financial aid, Stafford Loans and Pell Grants, will afford. The Plus loan is only for adoptive parents or biological parents, so grandma and grandpa and aunt and uncles can't help us with this. Like the student loans, the Plus loan has a 10-year term. It too can be paid off early without penalty. But pretty much right there, it starts to differ. A student doesn't need to do anything other than fill out a FAFSA in order to receive the Stafford loans, as long as you're not in default or over Pell overpayment. But a parent has to actually fill out an application for the Plus loan. And I'm going to show you an example of that. And please don't laugh when I say it is simple. I'm not kidding. Here is an example of your Plus application: name, address, phone number, social security, and date of birth. The reason why it is this way is there's only a few things that the feds are looking for when they go to approve a Parent Plus application. One is, have they filed bankruptcy within the last 5 years? Two, do they have a history of delinquent payments? And three is whether or not they've had any accounts sent to collections or liens placed against them in court. Notice that they don't ask you how much you make, they don't ask what is your mortgage payment, and a lot of it is because they just simply don't care. So this is a form that you would fill out and you would send back to me. I probably would send it to you via DocuSign, or you can go online to guess where, studentaid.gov, and apply for it online on your own. Now, that process is a little bit more detailed. They will ask you questions as to whether or not you're employed, but generally, the answer, the are you going to be approved, nothing to do with your employment, how much you make, and how much your income to debt ratio is. All right. So, back to that form of 14-year education, I want to point out a couple of things. Your interest rate on your PLUS loan is higher. Right now, it's sitting at about 5.3%. That loan fee, where it is 1.059 on the Stafford loan, is 4.258 for the parent loan. So, in essence, the parents need to borrow a higher dollar to get to the net figure that they need to help pay for the student tuition and fees. The other thing that is different about a PLUS loan is the fact that it has greater borrowing power than the student loans. Students are tremendously limited on the amount of money that they can receive. If you are a dependent student, I just flip it the other way. If you're an independent student, you're allowed to borrow maybe $4,000 more than a dependent student, and the maximum that a first year undergraduate independent student can borrow, a whopping $9,500. Not a lot of money. So in the case of dependent students, this PLUS loan is sometimes very, very helpful. The second part about a PLUS loan that's very different is there is no grace period. So parents would begin repayment on that loan within usually 50% of the student's program. So when the student reaches midpoint, the parent loan would normally go into repayment at that time. Now, you can request a deferment, which allows that first payment to be postponed until or deferred until the student has been out of school for 6 months. That is oftentimes very, very helpful to our families that want the student to be responsible in all or part of that parent loan amount. So, 6 months after the student finishes school, they're in their career, they're established, their monthly payments on their student loans is going to be should range anywhere between $50 to $89 a month. It's not going to be all that great, but that allows them then to contribute to the PLUS loan as well. Now, I know you students don't want to hear that from me, but that is always an option that your parents can choose. All right. So I think we've pretty well managed what type of loans that we have here at Omega, what type of grants, what they involve. We've talked about dependency, what makes an independent and dependent student. Here, as I mentioned down on the bottom, is our school code, and that we want to put into the FAFSA so that we can make sure the information gets to me. Now, you also can put the school code in for 9 other schools if you want. You're not limited to just one. I'm going to take a minute here just to grab through and make sure. All right. Let me just finish off by clarifying a little bit about which FAFSA do I fill out. Every October, the federal government makes available through their studentaid.gov website the FAFSA that's going to pertain to the upcoming award year. The federal government's new year begins July 1 and runs through June 30th. So now we are in July of 2020. That means that the FAFSA that you would want to fill out is the 2020-21. Now, next year, or I should say in October, the FAFSA for the upcoming year will be available. Its fiscal year will start July 21 and end in June 30. So that application is going to be the 21-22 FAFSA. Every FAFSA is going to ask for information from the tax return. It will always ask for information from the tax year that is 2 years prior. So if we are filling out a 2021 FAFSA, we're going to be entering information from the 2018 tax year. Who do you include in the FAFSA? If you are a dependent student, your parent information has to be included. But let's talk about a couple situations that may exist. Student has been on their own since they were 18 years old, supporting themselves entirely, no parent support whatsoever. If you do not meet the criteria as an independent student, then whether or not your parent has been providing your support, that parent still has to be on that FAFSA. There are some circumstances that may not be the case. We would talk about them individually, but just be aware the fact that you are not living at home does not remove the parent from the FAFSA. Let's say that either you as a student or the parent are married and have either have separated. Now, you don't have to have a court separation. You can live in different households and consider yourselves separated. So, from a student perspective, if that fits your situation, maybe you are still filing joint because it's more beneficial to you from a tax perspective. Well, if you're separated on the day that you submit that FAFSA, you do not need to include your spouse's income. You only want to include your income on that FAFSA. The same is going to hold true if you are a separated parent. It may be, again, that you have filed separately, and that's fine. Maybe you have filed head of household. If you are married, well, let me back up. If on that FAFSA, when it asks you what your marital status is, if you consider yourselves separate and you and your spouse live in separate households, then you want to indicate separate on the FAFSA. If you are filing joint, married joint, then you want to separate your income from your spouse's income. But here's the kicker. And the parent whose information has to be on the FAFSA has to be the parent that provides more than 50% support for the student. So we could have some unusual situations where the student hasn't lived with either parent for a while. In that case, you need to give me a call. But for the most part, the parent that the student is living with is oftentimes thought of as the parent who is providing the most support. So, family size. That's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. But before I do that, let's go back to the FAFSA and the income. Whether you are a student or a parent, the FAFSA is asking for information that pertains to 2 years prior. Well, today, when we're filling it out, we might not have that same financial situation we did 2 years ago. If it is possible that your income in the current year is going to be less than what you reported in 2018, make sure your financial aid officer knows that, because there's a process called professional judgment that will allow, with the proper documentation in the file, for them to go in and change the income to reflect what is actually more relative today than what was in the past. That applies for students and parents. So back to the FAFSA. It's going to ask you how many are in the family. And your family size, again, is going to be dependent upon how many people, either you as an independent student or as a dependent student, how many people the parent provide more than 50% support. If you are, okay, parents, if you are providing more than 50% support for a child, stepchild, adopted child, biological child, you can include them in the family size even if they do not live under the same roof as you. The kicker is that you are the one providing more than 50% of their support. So if the feds consider living with a parent as more than 50%, you would have to be making payment to the other parent that is more than 50% of what it would cost for that student to live with that parent. Otherwise, you would not want to include that student or that child in your family size. You also can have dependents that are not children. You can have in-laws, mothers, parents, grandparents, lazy cousins, girlfriend's boyfriend. As long as you're providing more than 50% of that person's support, and that group of people must live under the same roof as you do. So you cannot have a daughter living with a boyfriend and you're paying all of the fees for him to live there as well as her. These are just examples. You could not include the second person as one that you're providing the support for because they have to live under your roof. But you can include your child because they don't have to be living actually with you. So I hope that's as clear as mud. All right, folks. Well, there's lots of other things involved with financial aid. We don't all fit in the same size square or round peg. If you have any questions on anything, please feel free to give me a call. You can reach me at our uh, studio number here at Omega, and that is 301-230-9100. Just ask for Denise. Also, you can reach me by email at financialaid@omegastudios.com. I do want to offer again the invite to allow me to help you with filling out that FAFSA if you need. Give me a call, send me an email. We'll set up a neuro appointment and we can manage that for you. And as I said before, there's a lot of advantages to doing it that way. Primarily, in my opinion, it's just faster. All right. Well, I don't have much more to share with you right now. This was intended as an abbreviated session. So, hope to be hearing from you soon. And please don't hesitate to give me a call if you think that I can be of any help. Thank you, and you have a wonderful day.